Hello, true crime fans. It's me, Kimi, and you are listening, like you don't already know, the Always Talking Crime podcast. So, we are getting ready to talk about these two pieces of human garbage named Fred and Rose West. It's the third and final part. I know I'm a day behind. I was so stressed out about it too. Guys, so yesterday was Memorial Day, and I had planned on recording at different times yesterday, but I never had a chance. I ended up kind of sleeping in. I walked my puppy dogs, and then I jumped on my boyfriend's Harley with him after leaving the gym, and we spent the day at the beach. So I was exhausted from so many drinks and so much sun. In fact, I have a major sunburn. I look like a lobster pretty much right now. So I basically fell asleep in the sun. So I figured that instead of trying to force it and do it when I was tired, I figured I would wait till today. So I just got home from work, and I am ready to finish the story with you now and let you know all the outcome from the court proceedings and everything that happened. Are you guys ready? Let's do it. All right, you guys, I hope you've been enjoying this podcast so far, and especially parts 1 and 2 of this case. It was really, I don't want to say fun doing it and researching it, because it literally did make me sick, but I'm a little bit proud of myself for just jumping right in and doing a major case so early on in this podcast, because I was a little bit scared to do something well known and something lengthy. So now I pop my cherry and I'm sure we'll have some more 2 and 3 parters in the future, but I promise not to leave you hanging for an entire week, because like I said before, I don't think that's nice. So anyways, we are going to pick up after Fred and Rose were talked to by the police and everything, and all that kind of stuff. So it was on February 26th, the day after Fred West made his confession, that police began excavating the section of the garden at Cromwell Street where Fred indicated he had buried Heather's body. Shortly after 4 p.m., police found a human thigh bone protruding from a section of the garden Fred had insisted police not look in. Excavating that section of the garden where Fred had indicated he had buried his daughter's body, investigators discovered a mass of jumbled human remains encased in the remnants of a bin bag and intertwined with 2 lengths of rope. These dismembered remains were taken to the police headquarters for further examination, where they were to be determined to be those of a young woman with 1 kneecap and several fingers missing, which is weird. I've heard of fingers being missing or fingertips being missing, but why a fucking kneecap? That's weird. The descendants' fingernails were also discovered in a pile, suggesting they may have been torn from her fingers as a means of torture before her death. Several hours later, The body was identified by dental records of being that of Heather West. That evening, having been formally charged with his daughter's murder and questioned as to why police had also discovered a third thigh bone, Fred confessed that there were 2 further sets of human remains in his garden, and he agreed to return to Cromwell Street to reveal the locations of both of the graves, one of whom he named as Shirley Robinson, whom he described as being a former tenant and a lesbian who had been heavily pregnant with his child at the time of her 1978 murder. Which, if she's a lesbian, why is she knocked up with his kid? I mean, I guess, like, he raped her or, like, all that kind of crazy stuff, but it's just kind of, like, it's weird. So, anyways, the other victim he incorrectly described as being Shirley's mate, but either could not or would not elaborate as to her identity. Both sets of remains were discovered on February 28th, and Fred was charged with both of these murders 2 days later. Having discovered 3 sets of human remains in the garden, a decision was made to thoroughly search the entire property. You think? Rose was placed in a safe house in the nearby town of Dursley as police commenced their search inside 25 Cromwell Street. Fred was informed of this fact, and the formal interviews conducted by the investigative team lasted up to 16 hours each day. It included persistent questioning as to the whereabouts of his first wife, Rena, and his stepdaughter, Charmaine, and Fred authorized his solicitor to pass a note he had written to the leader of the murder investigation. His name was Superintendent John Bennett of the Gloucestershire Police. This note, which was dated March 4th, read, "I, Frederick West, authorize my solicitor, Howard Ogden, to advise Superintendent Bennett that I wish to admit a further approximate 9 killings, expressly Charmaine, Rena, Linda Go, and others to be identified. F. West." Questioned further as to his claims, Fred calmly explained that there were a further 5 bodies buried in his cellar and a 6th body beneath the ground floor bathroom. Ew. Most of these victims, Fred claimed, had been hitchhikers or girls he had murdered in the 1970s after picking them up at bus stops. Initially, Fred claimed that these 6 victims had been killed when they had threatened to inform Rose of his infidelity with women, and that he had transported their bodies to Cromwell Street to abuse, dismember, and then bury them in shallow graves. So he's like totally fucking lying. The dismemberment, Fred claimed, had made it easier to bury the remains in shallow cubicle graves, and he agreed to return to Cromwell Street to indicate precisely where he had buried each and every victim. Between March 5th and March 8th, police found 6 more bodies of young females at 25 Cromwell Street. Each victim had been extensively mutilated, and each body bore evidence of having been subjected to extreme sexual abuse prior to the murders. For example, the 3rd set of remains discovered in the cellar was found with a length of cloth wrapped around the skull. It also had an oval of adhesive tape, 16 inches in circumference, found with the remains, which had more than likely been used to gag this victim. Her ankles and her wrists were also bound with a large section of rope. Also found in this grave was a large serrated knife. The 2nd set of remains was found with a section of tubing that was twisted into a U shape alongside her severed limbs, and her skull was found encased in adhesive tape, which had been wrapped around the section where her face had been 11 or 12 times. There was also a narrow plastic tube inserted where the nasal cavities had been in an effort to allow her to breathe prior to her murder. Just gruesome. Each set of remains were missing numerous bones, particularly finger bones, which is so weird. When questioned, Fred refused to divulge the whereabouts of the missing bones from each set of remains or the reason for the absence of those bones. Okay, we're going to talk about the arrest of Rose West now. Despite Fred's insistence that Rose held no knowledge of the murders whatsoever, investigators suspected otherwise because they're not complete and utter dumbasses. Rose was arrested on April 20th of 1994, initially on offenses related to the rape of an 11-year-old girl and the physical assault of an 8-year-old boy. They were both charges that dated back from the mid-1970s. The following day, though, she was refused bail and transferred to Pucklechurch Prison to be held in the maximum security wing. Here, she was questioned more closely about all of the murders, in particular those of both Heather West and Linda Go. 4 days later, on April 25th, Rose was formally charged with Linda Go's murder. By May 6th, Fred and Rose were jointly charged with 5 counts of murder, with Rose simply replying, "I'm innocent," upon hearing each formal charge, a response that proved to be a theme throughout each of the 46 interviews that investigators held with her before her trial. Fred had confessed to the murders of his first wife, Rena, and his stepdaughter, Charmaine, as well as the murders of the victims exhumed from Cromwell Street. Fred also agreed to identify each burial location, and the remains were unearthed between April 10th and June 7th. After that, he was transferred to Birmingham's HM Prison, Birmingham, where a strict suicide watch called for his cell to be checked every 15 minutes. Fred and Rose West were both brought before a magistrate's court in Gloucester on June 30th of 1994. Fred was charged with 12 murders and Rose was charged with 9 murders. This was the first time the couple had seen each other since Fred was arrested in February. Prior to hearing the formal charges against them, Fred leaned towards Rose and gently placed his hand upon her shoulder. But in response, Rose, who was ignoring Fred's presence, visibly winced in discomfort. Both were ordered to be held on pre-trial detention, so neither one was going anywhere. As police attempted to lead Fred from the hearing, he resisted their efforts, and again he attempted to move towards Rose, who again winced and attempted to move away from his grasp. Immediately after this court appearance, Fred was rearrested on suspicion of murdering Anne McFall, whose body had been found on June 7th, but had not been officially identified until this date. He was formally charged with Anne's murder on July 3rd and appeared in court the following morning. As Fred was held at the prison in the months following his arrest, Fred became increasingly depressed. This became even worse after Rose's public rejection of him in court, her refusal to reply to any letters he sent her, which is weird. Like, how does he get to send her letters? Like, if they're both in prison, I think that's just fucking weird that, you know, I get that they're allowed to send mail, but I think that it should not be okay for prisoners to send fucking letters to each other, especially, you know, when they're still awaiting trial. I thought that was like super odd. I never realized, you know, that people could do that while they're awaiting trial. But anyways, because she didn't reply to any of his letters, and reports were also leaked to the press in which Rose had assumed the role of a grieving mother who had lost a daughter and stepdaughter. Let me try that again. So Rose was pretending for the press to be a grieving mom who had lost her daughter and her stepdaughter to her husband's crime. She publicly declared both her innocence of murder and her hatred of him. The only children to go visit Fred were Stephen and Anna Marie. And he pleaded with both of them to convey to Rose that he loved her, but Rose would never acknowledge these overtures. In response, Fred withdrew his earlier confessions to having acted alone in the murders. Instead, he accused his wife of almost total culpability in all of the murders to which he had been charged, excluding the one of Anne McFall, which he had claimed that Rena had committed. So he wasn't even confessing to killing Anne McFall. He was trying to pin that murder on Rena. This is a letter that was written by Fred to Rose West, Steve, and May. Well, Rose, it's your birthday on November 28th, and you will be 41 and still beautiful and still lovely, and I love you. We will always be in love. The most wonderful thing in my life was when I met you. Our love is special to us. So, love, keep your promises to me. You know what they are. Where we are put together forever and ever is up to you. We loved Heather, both of us. I would love Charmaine to be with Heather and Rena. You will always be Mrs. West, all over the world. That is important to me and to you. I haven't gotten you a present, but all I have is my life. I will give it to you, my darling. When you are ready, come to me. I will be waiting for you. And this was Fred West's suicide note. The initially strict suicide watch having been relaxed, on January 1st of 1995, Fred West killed himself in his cell by asphyxiation. He wrapped an improvised rope that he had constructed from a blanket and tags he had stolen from prison laundry bags around his neck. Then he binded this device to a door handle and window catchment and sank to his knees. At the bottom of the suicide note found in his cell was a drawing of a gravestone with which was written, "In loving memory, Fred West, Rose West. Rest in peace where no shadow falls. In perfect peace, he waits for Rose, his wife." Yeah, fuck you, Fred West. I mean, it pisses me off. I mean, I'm glad he's dead, but it pisses me off that he didn't have to do any more time. He really didn't even have to pay for his crimes. I mean, he took the easy coward's way out, which I hate when fucking people do that. I mean, it grinds my gears. But anyways, I'm going to talk to you now about Rose's trial. So at the pretrial proceedings in February, Rose pled not guilty to 10 charges of murder. The murder of Charmaine West had also been added to the original 9 after Fred committed suicide, and 2 counts of rape and indecent assault of young girls had been dropped with a view for later resubmission. Her trial at Winchester Crown Court began on October 3rd of 1995. An important early decision by the judge was to admit testimony related to the sexual mistreatment of 3 women by Fred and Rose, accepting the prosecution's argument that it established a pattern of behavior that was repeated in the murders. In his opening statement, prosecutor Brian Levison portrayed the Wests as sex-obsessed sadistic murderers, terming that the bodies discovered at Cromwell Street and Midland Road held, quote, secrets more terrible than words can express. The victims' last moments on earth were as objects of the depravity of this woman and her husband, end quote. He pointed out that Fred was incarcerated when Charmaine West was killed, and he claimed that the Wests each had learned from their mistake in allowing Caroline Owens to live, and said that the gag on victim Therese Segenthaler had a feminine touch, which was the scarf around her was tied in a bow. He promised to demonstrate Rose's controlling and sexually sadistic character and her efforts to deflect suspicion about the disappearance of her victims. Prosecution witnesses included Cromwell Street lodgers, victims' relatives, Rose's mother Daisy and her sister Glennis, and surviving victims, which included Anna Marie West, Catherine Halliday, who was a former lover of the Wests, as well as Caroline Owens. There was also a witness who was called Miss A, who had been sexually assaulted at age 14 by Fred and Rose in the year 1977. Miss A described Rose as the more aggressive perpetrator of the two. Neighbors described Charmaine's 1971 disappearance while Fred was imprisoned, and they also described Rose's casual indifference to Heather's disappearance. Rose's counsel, Richard Ferguson, tried to discredit prosecution witnesses as either having financially exploited their connection to the case or being motivated by grudges. Caroline Owens did admit to receiving £20,000 for her story, but she also described her extreme survivor's guilt. I can only imagine. She described it like this: "I only want to get justice for the girls who didn't make it. I feel like it was my fault." Ferguson emphasized that Fred, before meeting Rose, had committed at least one murder strikingly similar to those at issue in the present trial, and that the prosecution's case was largely circumstantial. He contended that Rose was unaware of the extent of Fred's sadism and urged the jury not to be prejudiced by her promiscuity and her domineering manner. So she's a bossy slut, but never mind that. Don't pay any attention to that, I guess, is what he was trying to tell them. Against the advice of her counsel, Rose herself testified, and her manner sometimes was morose and tearful. Sometimes it was upbeat and humorous. She wept while describing herself as a victim of child abuse and rape who naively married a violent and domineering man. But then, on the other hand, she joked about issues such as her always being pregnant and laughed while describing one victim's grandfather glasses. She also claimed never to have met 6 of the victims buried out on Cromwell Street, and she also claimed to recall very little of her assault on Caroline Owens. When showed photographs of the victims buried in the cellar and victim Allison Chambers and asked by whether she recognized any of their faces, Rose's face turned bright red, and she repeatedly stuttered as she replied, "No, sir." When questioned, I was going to try to stutter and say it, but I'm not a good stutterer. So I would have totally messed it up, but it would have been funny had I been able to do it. So I could totally picture her just stuttering all over the fucking place. But anyways, when Rose was questioned as to life at Cromwell Street, she claimed that she and Fred had lived separate lives, which was inconsistent with the earlier testimony of witnesses who had visited or lodged at their address. In reference to her relationship with her eldest child, Rose admitted that her relations with Heather were strained before claiming to the court that her daughter was a lesbian who had physically and psychologically abused her siblings. Fucking bitch liar. Despite these allegations, Rose stated that she had loved Heather and held no knowledge of her murder. Further questioned as to the contradictory explanations she and Fred had given as to Heather's disappearance, Rose just claimed that these discrepancies had stemmed from telephone conversations she had had with Heather after she had left their home. The defense next called a succession of women who all claimed to have been attacked or assaulted by a lone male whose physical description matched that of Fred West between the years 1966 and 1975. These 7 women each testified that they recognized their attacker as Fred West when his photograph appeared in the media in 1994. The intention of this testimony was to illustrate to the jury that Fred was capable of abducting, assaulting, or attempting to attack women without Rose, which the prosecution had never disputed. The physical recollections of several of these women varied greatly. The final witness to testify at Rose's trial was Fred's appointed appropriate adult, Janet Leach, whom the prosecution had called to testify on November 7th in rebuttal to the tape recordings of Fred's confession. This confession had been played to the court on November 3rd, in which he had stressed time and time again that Rose had known nothing at all about any of the murders. Leach testified that through this role, Fred had gradually begun to view her as a confidant and had confided in her that on the evening prior to his February 25th arrest, that he and Rose had formed a pact that he would take full responsibility for all of the murders, many of which he privately described to her as being, quote unquote, some of Rose's mistakes. Fred has also divulged that Rose had indeed murdered Charmaine while he had been incarcerated and had also murdered Shirley Robinson. Fred had told her that he had dismembered the victims, and Rose had participated in the mutilation and dismemberment of Shirley Robinson, having personally removed Robinson's unborn child from her womb after her death. In reference to the remaining 8 murders for which Rose was charged, Leach testified that Fred had confided to her that Rose had played a major part in all of these murders. Upon cross-examination, I don't know why I can't talk. We're almost done though, guys, so you don't have to put up with me for much longer, at least until next Sunday. Just a few more days, you guys get a new case. Upon cross-examination, Leach did concede that she had earlier lied under oath about having sold her story to a national newspaper, although she was adamant as to the sincerity of her testimony. While delivering this testimony, Leach collapsed, and the trial was adjourned for 6 days. She returned to complete her cross-examination on November 13th. After 7 weeks of evidence, the judge instructed the jury, emphasizing that circumstantial evidence can be sufficient for finding of guilt, and that if 2 people take part in a murder, the law considers them equally guilty regardless of which one of them did the deed. With that, on November 21st and November 22nd, the jury returned unanimous guilty verdicts for all 10 murders. Terming Rose's crimes as appalling and depraved, the judge sentenced Rose to life in prison, emphasizing that she should never, ever be paroled. Initially, Rose was incarcerated at HMP Bronzefield as a Category A prisoner, which has the highest level of security. She was later transferred to HM Prison Low Newton before being transferred to HM Prison Newhall in 2019. To this day, Rosemary West continues to protest her innocence. And guys, that is the disgusting and gruesome and depraved story of Fred and Rose West and the House of Horrors. I hope you enjoyed it. Not enjoy as like, yes, this is so much fun, but you know what I mean. As true crime lovers, we tend to enjoy hearing these stories. Yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do for this next week's case. It's going to be just a one-parter. I do know that. I'm not ready to take on another long one 2 weeks in a row. But it's going to be something in the United States. I'm considering doing something that takes place in Texas for the reason that Texas this past week bypassed Florida in listenership, which this was the first time a state bypassed Florida, because I live in Florida. So, you know, I know a lot of people in Florida. So obviously like friends and acquaintances and maybe even some nosy people that I don't know. I don't want to say don't like me, but you know what I mean. You know how some people are like, well, I'm going to go listen to their podcast and see what this is all about because I don't want that bitch to be any good at it. There's always somebody that's going to be snarky. And yeah. So anyways, which reminds me, like, okay, this is a really bad story. Last Tuesday, it was the same day as the killing, as the mass shooting at the elementary school in Texas. A woman got shot in the face 7 times at the gym that I teach Zumba fitness at. I teach Zumba fitness classes. I used to do that full time, like for 20 years, and now I just teach every Thursday morning. It's my day off during the week from my job selling cars. So I teach, this one fitness class, and it's tons of fun, and I have a great group of ladies, and we shake our asses all over the place. We have a good time. But early that morning, that Tuesday morning, this woman named Carla was working out at the gym, and at 4:34 a.m., her boyfriend, or I don't know, it might have been her ex-boyfriend. She was in an unhappy relationship with someone. I don't know a lot of the details, but I know that she did have a restraining order on him, from what I heard. He used his key fob to go into the gym because they weren't open yet, but it was like one of those 24-hour type places. He used his key fob to enter the gym, and he shot Carla in the face 7 times. So, obviously she passed away, and it was a terrible incident that happened, and everybody's just been devastated here in, the Pensacola area. So that was like a devastating thing that happened that morning, and then with the children being killed and the teachers being killed at the school in Texas later that afternoon, it was just like a really somber day and a really somber week, actually. So I don't know. So if you guys could just say some prayers for all of the families. All of the families need thoughts and prayers right now. The families of every child, the families of every teacher, the families of that entire community in Texas, they need our thoughts and prayers. And please send your love and your thoughts and your prayers to Carla and her family. And I'd even like you guys to send your well wishes to the murderer's family, because, I've heard through the grapevine that his mother especially is just like really upset, I don't know. I sold a car to a lady over the weekend that had ties, like 1 degree of separation, to each the victim and the murderer. And I guess that her brother used to date the murderer's sister. And then her brother, or somebody else, her brother-in-law, that's what it was. Her brother-in-law used to be the JV basketball coach, and Carla was the varsity basketball coach. Carla was very athletic. She was a teacher and a coach, and she is greatly missed, and she will always be greatly missed and loved. And, my heart just goes out to all of them. So, yeah, guys. Until next time, I'm going to bring you something from Texas. I don't know what yet. I have a couple of things in mind, but I'm not exactly sure which one I'm going to start researching tomorrow. I love you guys. Make sure you follow me on all the things. Make sure that you hit the follow button on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. Please rate it 5 stars, pretty please. Please write me a review if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. That would be amazing. In fact, I was thinking about this earlier today. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts and you actually leave me a review so I can see who you are, I am going to put your name in a drawing. I have this drawing on Instagram going on right now. I'm going to do the drawing on my birthday, which is June 26th, okay? So it's less than a month away. I decided that that's going to be the day that I'm going to draw. It's a really cute tumbler. Go on Instagram, scroll down. I'll probably post about it again maybe this week, maybe tomorrow. If you leave me a review so I see who you are, you will get your name entered into the drawing 5 times for a review, a written review, okay? I would really, really appreciate if you could do that for me. What else? All the things, okay? Have a great day. Be kind to each other, and we all know that our time on this planet could end at any time. Like, we never know when we're done on this earth. Nobody knows, what's in store, what's around the corner, what's going to happen tomorrow. So live every moment of your life as wonderfully and positively and lovingly as you can, okay? Until Sunday, keep talking crime.